So hi everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to have you participate in today's workshop on diverse communication. My name is Lynn Mattis, pronouns she and her, and I'm an alumni coordinator at Mohawk College. The Alumni Relations Department is here to support graduating students and alumni in helping you stay connected with the Mohawk community through events like this, communications, alumni benefits, volunteering, and more. Now, before we get started, although we are gathering in a virtual environment, it is important to acknowledge the land we are on and those who shared it before us. Mohawk College campuses and where I reside in Mississauga is situated on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations within lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement and is currently home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. In recognizing there remains a lot of work to be done in healing this relationship and breaking down the many barriers for Indigenous people that still exist today, as an individual whose ancestors were settlers to this land, I commit to actively reflect and work to unlearn my bias, listen, and continue to grow my knowledge and understanding of Indigenous cultures. It is now my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for today's workshop, Louis Pertico. Louis is a senior therapist at Shift Collab, one of Canada's largest therapy practices. As a registered social worker and facilitator, Louis focuses on the exploration of identity, inclusion, communication, and the healing of trauma. Louis has delivered workshops to a wide range of educational institutions and corporate teams looking to explore these. Welcome, Louis. It's really great to have you back with us. We're really excited to have you guide us through this discussion today. And again, I know we have a lot to cover, so I will hand the microphone over to you to get things started.
Great. Thank you very much, Lynn, for the welcome. I'm very excited to be back with all of you folks today. So happy that we could get together again to do this. So I'll just give myself a little bit of an introduction as well. As Lynn said, my name is Louis Pertico. My pronouns are he, him, they, and I'm a registered social worker with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers and a clinical therapist at Shift Collab. So a little bit about me so you know who's talking. I'm a queer and a Black therapist, and my professional background as a social worker has spanned across most age groups in the mental health and addictions field. I did my Bachelor of Social Work at Laurentian University up in Sudbury, Ontario, and my Master's in Social Work at Carleton University in Ottawa, and I currently call Sudbury, Ontario home. I've been doing work in equity and in facilitating workshops through my undergrad and a lot more through grad school. And I'm really passionate about serving my communities, the Black community and the queer community. And that is why I do workshops like this. That is why I practice social work the way that I practice. In my practice as a therapist, I do primarily support Black and otherwise racialized folks. Those queer folks around pieces around identity, trauma, and navigating systems that were not traditionally created for our bodies and identities. And I really, like I said, get to, or consider myself fortunate to get to facilitate this workshop with you all this evening. So thank you for taking some time out of your Wednesday on this somewhat cooler spring day that we're getting. So in pursuit of reconciliation, I'm committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. I'd like to give a land acknowledgement as well for the space that Shift's head office occupies, as well as the space that I occupy. Knowing where we are and where we stand is so important and imperative when we recognize identity, when we recognize the practice of things like allyship, even when we look at talking about communication like we're going to be doing today. We have to really understand that we don't own the land that we use, that it was stolen, how it was stolen, and who it actually belongs to, because this all contributes to a safer environment. It contributes to a environment that moves towards something where everybody can be treated in an equitable fashion. So the land on which I'm giving this presentation today is in the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory, and it's the traditional territory of the Atikamekw Anishinaabe. And the land on which Shift's head office is located is the ancestral traditional territories of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, which is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. If you are ever looking for information on the land that you happen to inhabit, there's a really great website called whos.land. You just type in your address and it'll provide you all the information about whose territory it is, different treaties and things like that that were involved in the space that you exist in. So in every workshop I do, so I recognize a few names that are in the group from last time. So you might be familiar that I like to enter a space in a little bit of a mindful way, particularly when we're working in this virtual shared space, when often a lot of us are spending our days doing virtual work. We're coming into the evening after sometimes a full work day or school or childcare or all of this other stuff, and taking an hour or so out of our evening to do something like this. So it's really important to just take some time to check in with our bodies and be able to enter into this space in a good and mindful way. So I'm just going to lead us through a quick exercise, and you can just follow along with me wherever you are signing in from. So while we're doing this exercise, you're going to want to be doing some nice deep breaths in through the nose if possible, and exhaling through the mouth as possible. What we're going to be doing as you're inhaling is you're going to be pushing your stomach out as if you're inflating a balloon. And when you're exhaling, you're going to be bringing your stomach back in as if you're deflating that balloon. It's a bit of a fake movement, but the reason that we do this is because we're trying to engage your diaphragm. Any singers, musicians, actors, things like that will be familiar with that muscle in our body. That's the one that helps us project and helps us get the nice big breath that we can get, and nice good inhale of oxygen into ourselves. So as we do that, I'm just going to lead us through a little bit of an exercise. Okay, so we'll start just with an inhale and exhale, and inhale again, and exhale. As you continue to breathe in and out slowly, just following the rhythm that feels right for your body, I'm just going to invite you to just do a quick inventory from head to toe. Just noticing what's going on within or outside of your body. Noticing if your body is calling out to you for anything. If any judgment comes into your mind, that's okay. Give yourself permission to let that judgment go and focus yourself back on just scanning down your body. Perhaps your body is asking you for a drink of water. Perhaps it's asking you to take a nap. Maybe your body's even telling you to sign out of this presentation and go have dinner. Just notice whatever it is that you might need, what your body might need from you. And then as you continue to breathe, I'll just invite you to engage in a bit of a negotiation process with your body. How can you provide your body with that thing that it needs? Maybe it's at 7:30 when we're done here. Maybe it's right now. Maybe it's tomorrow. But just notice what you can do to provide your body that thing that it deserves for having brought you here today, all the positive and helpful things it does for you, and how it's carried you through this life. And once you've done that, I'll invite you just to thank your body. Thank it for, like I said, all the things it's done for you. The way that your body's carried you through life. If any judgments pop up here either, just give yourself permission to let those things drift away. Just focus on that gratitude practice. So we're going to take 2 final deep breaths in through the nose, exhale through the mouth, and we'll all come back here together. Okay. Small downfall of the virtual workshop world is I have no idea if that was good for folks, but hopefully you got to practice along wherever you are, and that felt like a good way to enter into this space together today. So I'm gonna just pose a question to you all to get a little bit of a landmark of where we're at, because we're talking about communication, diversifying communication today. So I'm just wondering for you folks, what do you find the most challenging about communication? What's brought you in to talk about this today? If you're comfortable typing it in the chat box, if you're comfortable unmuting, you can shout it out here. I'm just curious what thoughts people might have. So it sounds like there's maybe some the pervasive concern, it sounds like, is maybe around, what if somebody doesn't understand me? How do I make sure that I'm getting a thought across in a clear and effective manner? So hopefully we'll touch on those things, and like I said, we'll always have time to get some questions in at the end. A couple other things popping into the chat box there. Find the right words to express feelings, which is especially hard when you're an English language learner. Yes, absolutely. And tone as well as another comment. 100%. I want to go back to this idea of it being hard to find the right words when you're an English language learner. I find in a lot of spaces that we happen to inhabit, in Ontario, at least in Canada perhaps, there's almost the assumption that everybody does or should speak English, and we just know that's not the case. So yeah, hopefully we can learn how to communicate perhaps with folks where English is not their first language, or how we can learn to communicate with somebody whose first language is not the one that we happen to speak as well. Thanks, everybody. So my intention today is to support you in understanding safer and effective communication. When we talk about safer and effective communication, we talk about both yourself and others. And so I was a bit challenged when I approached this presentation by the word diverse. After giving it some thought, I was unsure about how to talk about communication necessarily as diverse or diversifying it. So I realized that maybe somewhat colloquially, I'm going to call this workshop something like communication, not everyone is you. So why is that important? It's important because people be different. Every person is going to communicate and receive communication in very different ways based on so many different and varying factors. Some of them were brought up in that last question that I mentioned. So effective and safer communication is much more possible when we're able to look beyond our own worldview of communication, listening, and perception. There was another comment dropped in the chat box. During the pandemic, the use of text and email, receptive in what you are thinking when reading, as well as response. Yeah, so I do talk about the virtual world, especially how we were thrust into it even more so than we already were with the pandemic. Very hard to communicate via text effectively. Thank you for that. So the first thing I want to talk about is safety. So to talk about the safer part of communication, let's understand first what a safer space is in the context of a classroom. And so this is a study, and we're just going to be generalizing this out to campus, a workplace perhaps, and beyond. So this 2005 study published in the Journal of Social Work Education talks about the concept of safe space and a student's perspective of safe space in the classroom. So classroom safety refers to protection from psychological or emotional harm. It does not refer to being comfortable. So the study actually goes so far as to say that a classroom in which there is no conflict or where nobody feels discomfort is likely to be one where little learning or growth actually happens. If we're to look at this on a campus, a workplace, or a societal level, it's the same thing. We want there to be some protection for there to be a safer space of psychological or emotional harm. But again, it does not mean that there's only comfort, because if there is only comfort, that means there is nobody being challenged and nobody is learning. In this same study, 97% of the student respondents were indicating that the safe classroom changed what they learned. and 79% of those same students indicated that they learned more in a safe classroom. So this is, again, that concept of not only being comfort happening there. So others' experiences, or learning about others' perspectives, learning about others' ideas and thoughts is what became more personal in this classroom. And they noticed they were challenged to expand their viewpoint and think outside of their own box that they had created. So safer and effective communication does not equal no risk or no discomfort. I want to be a little bit specific that we might traditionally think of queerness or the LGBTQS plus community when we hear the word safer space. However, the concept of safety in space really and in communication goes far beyond to consider differences in worldview, ability, bodies, ethnicity, race, gender, sexuality, you name it. Safer and effective communication does not mean that there is no risk involved. Everybody will make mistakes. I'm going to quote, this is for my millennials out there, I'm going to quote Ms. Frizzle from the famed TV show Magic School Bus. And she always says, let's take chances, make mistakes, and get messy. The safer part of communication comes into play through curiosity. And curiosity can be scary. However, there's a difference between curiosity and ignorance. So in safer communication, we acknowledge not only your own emotions, reactions, and questions, but those of all participants. So one of the things that we really want to focus on is clear and direct expression. We just need to be clear and direct. When we add in fluff, when we add in innuendo or suggestion about what we want or need, our communication really gets lost. So if we can pull out the extra bits that really don't need to be there, if we can pull out the suggestions, then usually our communication can be a little bit more understood, can be a little bit more direct. I work on communication a lot with clients in individual sessions, and my favorite example is, I don't know if you've ever had a pack of gum in a group of people. This always happens to me, but you have a pack of gum in a group of people, you pull out the pack of gum, and you take out a piece for yourself. 9 times out of 10, somebody in that group either asks for the gum and then suddenly you have none, or you get the, wow, it'd be really nice if I had a piece of gum right now comment. And I think we can probably, some of us agree that if somebody's making that comment, they're probably hinting at they would like a piece of gum. Is that a clear communication though? No. A clear and direct communication would just be, can I have a piece of gum? I don't know why that's the the thing that seems to be a universal experience that resonates with folks, but that's kind of where I really like to express that, like, clear direct communication without trying to assume that somebody else is going to be able to infer exactly what you meant is so important. So safer communication also involves emotion regulation. And so somebody had mentioned tone as being something with communication before. And so when I talk emotion regulation, I'm not talking tone policing, but just regulating emotion. So we know that your message is more likely to be heard depending on how you deliver it. That is just a fact. People tend to, if they hear an aggressive delivery, if they hear words that they don't like, just stop listening. The intonations and the inflections in our voices change the way that something is received by others. We cannot control how something is received by others. All we can control is the intent behind what we are saying. So emotion regulation is about you. You regulate your emotions for yourself so that you can stay on topic of your communication, and that so that you can understand how or why you might be reactive to other parties. So where emotion regulation is acknowledging other participants, it's seeing how they may react to your delivery and information, informing what you think might actually be received from what you said. So the reason I say this, which I'm hoping that's not too confusing, is that you can deliver a message however you want. You can communicate however you would like to communicate. Does that mean that the person across from you or the group in front of you is going to receive it the way you intended? No. So if you do think about, well, what are my emotions happening now? How are people going to react to what I'm saying? Then we can try and guess how people are going to receive what we say. And that's why I say I don't believe in tone policing, so I'm not going to tell you you have to watch your tone or speak XYZ. But what you might want to do is look at, well, how am I delivering something and how might this be received? And how efficient is it going to be if it is or is not received? Communication with any person, no matter who they are, is not and will not ever be perfect and clean. It just unfortunately does not happen. So, what is important when a mistake or is made or there's a miscommunication is apology and accountability. An apology is an admission of error or discourtesy accompanied by an expression of regret. Nowhere does it say anything about somebody that you're maybe had a mistake with or having a miscommunication with accepting your apology. Again, an apology really is about you expressing, I did something wrong here. It's important to acknowledge that you made a mistake, come from a kind place, a humble place, and a place of learning. And all you can do is offer an apology and hope that is accepted. You can't force somebody to accept something that's offered. Accountability is your obligation and willingness to accept responsibility for your actions. I had a question there. Can I have this PowerPoint? It will be sent out afterward. And I believe Lynn will disseminate it afterward. So in talking about accountability, in this context, we're talking about when a mistake is made or there is a miscommunication. Communication takes more than just you. It takes two at least to tango. And you can only take accountability for your part. And accountability does not include excuses and it does not include reasoning. If I know that a person can or will be able to take accountability, I'm much more likely to want to engage in communication with that person versus if I know that there's a pattern of a lack of accountability. So these are a few details around, well, what maybe can you do to contribute to safer communication? What may you look for in safer communication? So I'm going to pose another question is how do you know when you feel safer in communication with somebody? What does that look like for you? You can type it in the chat box or again, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any thoughts. So we will move on to talking about listening effectively. So the full picture of effective communication involves both verbal and nonverbal cues, which is active listening. Human beings, voices, worldviews, and approaches are very diverse, very varying, and so is our communication. That's why we say communication, not everybody is you, because not everybody is going to communicate the same way that you do. So paying attention to both verbal and nonverbal cues can be really, really important. Verbal cues could be words used, tone of voice, inflection, dialect of a language. Nonverbal cues could be use of hands while speaking. I became acutely aware of the use of my hands right now. It could be the type or the level of eye contact. It could be body movements or anything like that. All of these things, both verbal and nonverbal, are also highly dependent on culture, background, mental, cognitive, or physical health challenges, and context. Again, not everybody communicates the way that you do. So instead of assuming that someone else's intent instead of assuming someone else's intent in active listening, we can look for context clues. And when in doubt, we can just ask a question for clarification. And this is where we get to the digital age. So I have 3 messages here. And I'm wondering if folks can just type in the chat box or quickly shout out any of these 3 messages, 1, 2, or 3. How might you react to getting that message? So all of the messages are, we need to talk about last night. The difference being there's some punctuation, there's some capital letters. But I'm wondering if folks are noticing that they might react differently to 1 versus 3, perhaps, or 2 versus 3. And so it can really vary because everybody communicates a little bit differently, right? So it's really hard to communicate effectively virtually via text, even with different punctuation, even with different emojis, right? Because one person might get, we need to talk about last night, number 2, with the capital word need, and be like, oh my gosh, this person's yelling at me, something's wrong. And somebody else might see that and say, we need to talk about last night. Oh my gosh, some kind of drama happened that I wasn't involved in, and this person wants to gossip with me. Number 1, there's a period there, and there's a consistent joke out there that millennials do not text with periods because it scares us. And so you might see we need to talk about last night with a period, and that might feel really intimidating. That might feel very normal to you. It's really difficult because we have no idea really what any of them mean, whether they're positive or whether they're negative. It's all just conjecture because we don't know what the intent is. Um, we really are put in the position of assuming intent from minimal context when all we have is just words on a page. So when we talk about active listening, we talk about the difference between hearing, we talk about the difference rather between hearing and listening, where hearing is just accidental and voluntary, it doesn't require effort. For the most part, you just sit there and either it hits your ear in some way, you read lips, you receive a transcription, or it could be listening, which is more focused, voluntary, and intentional. So active listening is when we focus on the information, we absorb the information, and we respond to the information in a genuine and intentional way. So we take that information and we take the person delivering it seriously. So that means that we don't respond just to respond, we don't respond just to hear ourselves speak, but we respond with an intention to what we heard or interpreted from that person. So there are 4 principles to active listening, and they are intensity, empathy, acceptance, and responsibility. So intensity, we're looking at the focused effort to concentrate on the speaker. So this is one of those interesting moments where really it can also depend on the person that you're talking to. Some people from certain cultures, for example, do not make eye contact with people while they're talking. For some folks, they're just uncomfortable with eye contact when talking. So intensity to me could mean, I'm looking right at you, I'm staring at you, and I'm absorbing everything that you're saying. Intensity could also just mean the depth to which we are absorbing that information and making sure that we're not having as much going on in the background. Empathy is putting yourself in that person's shoes, so kind of trying to understand where they're perhaps coming from to be able to active listening, to be able to actively listen rather. Acceptance being absorbing what's being said without holding judgment. So just hearing what is said before responding. Sometimes we hear to respond. We don't want to do that. We just want to hear, process, then respond. And responsibility is that the listener, yourselves, or the other person, has to do their part to get all of the information from the speaker as well. So if there needs to be more context, if there needs to be clarification, if we're not understanding intent, my favorite question to folks is just, if I don't understand, it's just, I'm not sure what you meant by that. Can you explain? Simple as that. Simple, not simple sometimes. So let's talk about why to care. So when we start to be present through active listening and when we start to communicate with people who are not exactly the same as us, it impacts how we relate to and view the world and ourselves, actually. It also impacts the level to which we form connection with other people. All of these things happen when we aren't willing to adjust how we communicate with others. But let's talk about how some of these things that are down the right side of the screen here can be impacted and how there are also comorbidities to other communication challenges. So there certain neurodivergencies such as ADHD or autism spectrum disorders also have impact on all of these domains as symptoms. Being in an environment where you can't speak your mother tongue or that lacks psychological safety can impact all of these domains. Learning or processing disorders can also impact all these domains, and these are just a few comorbidities. So the reason you should care is because safe and effective communication not only includes you and your lens, it also includes someone else in their completely different lens. Every person enters into a communication with different bias, values, understandings, the list goes on. So not recognizing or allowing for someone else to have a different lens on is a great recipe for a communication breakdown. So I want to ask again a question. What do you think informs your listening lens? Do you think that values, role, past experiences, the things along the bottom here inform your listening lens? Do you think that they don't? Is there anything that maybe we haven't talked about that we haven't listened or haven't listed that you feel has a big impact on what your listening lens is? So we're going to talk about building blocks. So the expectations of communication are safety and consideration for all parties involved. That's you, that's the other person, that's other people. Mistakes, apologies, and accountability. Again, I put that as an expectation of communication because I really want to highlight it's gonna happen. Clear and direct expression, active and effective listening, and multiple listening lenses. Here's where we're going to build our toolkit. So the first thing I want to share is about distress tolerance and emotion regulation. So emotion regulation, you'll remember we talked about way back at the beginning. This is really important in communication, just so we can make sure we're staying on topic, we're staying on what we need to communicate, perhaps being able to absorb what the other person is giving to us as well. So this is just a skill around emotion regulation. It's called the STOP skill, and it's an acronym, so it's a little bit easier to remember. STOP. So the S stands for stop. That's just taking a break, just stopping. Or rather, it's not taking a break because the T is taking a break. Sorry. So S is just stopping. It's just literally stopping whatever action is about to happen if you're going to react to something or do something. The T is taking a break, whether that's an emotional break, whether that's a physical break, so removing yourself from a situation. Sometimes this can happen in seconds within your head. It could be just stopping and saying, I need a second to think about this. The O is observing. So what's happening around you? What's happening within you? And what information do you need about it? If we can observe what is happening in the communication between us, am I having a reaction here? Is this person having a reaction here? Am I making an assumption about what the reaction is? Perhaps there is some kind of miscommunication happening. Perhaps there's not. Perhaps this is a great communication. It's still important to know, am I reactive to something? And then the P is proceeding mindfully. So once you've gathered all the information, proceeding mindfully is when you can decide how you're going to take your next steps. So that is re-engaging the conversation, that is responding, that is taking that action. This skill particularly is really good in communication because it stops that instant gratification moment. So sometimes, particularly around a miscommunication, I can speak for myself alone here, that sometimes that little like petty perhaps voice will pop up and want to be like, what about this? Or no, I think this, and make a comment, say something. Usually it's not going to be helpful in a communication. So if we think STOP, we think we want to stop, we want to do this emotion regulation and distress tolerance skill, then we can engage in communication in a clear and effective way, in a safer way, so that we're not getting away from whatever the topic of that communication might be. The second piece we want to add in here is just a couple of active listening skills. So there's just two examples on here around paraphrasing and clarifying, and there is a worksheet that we'll send out afterward that I'll be providing to Lynn that'll go out with the slideshow as well. So we have paraphrasing and we have clarifying. If you've ever been in therapy before, these are two of a therapist's best tips and tricks. It's Therapy 101. So, paraphrasing is simply just restating what the person said back to them using different words and trying to be more concise, basically, just to make sure that you understand what was happening. If you are able to paraphrase back, if you're able to say, I think I heard you maybe say this. Is that correct? The person's either going to tell you, yeah, that's correct, or they're going to be like, no, you have it wrong. Then you can kind of further that communication along. Clarifying is just looking for more information on certain aspects of what the conversation is, where you might choose clarifying if there are perhaps some aspects of that information that you're like, oof, I really don't know what's going on here. Where you might choose paraphrasing if you think you have a pretty good full picture of what's happening and you just want to kind of put it back out there to make sure you're both understanding the same thing. Both can be used at the same time, both can be used in the same conversation. There's a couple of really good skills that you can take forward with you, hopefully, from here. So your action plan, a little bit of a stop, start, and continue. So just on your own, I'm just going to invite you all as you go through the rest of this evening, the rest of today, the rest of the week, the rest of life. We just want you to think about, in communication, what's one behavior you're going to stop doing today? And how are you going to stop doing it? Is there something that you're thinking like, oh, you know what? I do that and that really doesn't work. What's something that you're going to start doing? Is there a skill perhaps that you've learned from the last couple of slides? Is there perhaps something that you thought about communication that just didn't occur to you before? And what are you going to continue? We all communicate every single day in our lives. So I guarantee you, if there's something you're doing right, there's probably a lot that you can continue. And I just give some thought to like, okay, well, what am I doing well? Like use some self-compassion there, give yourself some grace. All right, and with that, I'm just gonna say thank you. I'm going to drop my email here. It's lewis@shiftcollab.com. I provided Shift's website where you can find the bios of all of our amazing therapists. You can find our blog with amazing mental health content that I contribute to regularly, and any and all start of therapy and workshop information. Shift's phone number is here as well as the email in case you are interested in reaching out to our care coordination team to access therapy. You can find Shift Collab across socials at the Shift Collab and myself on Instagram at lewispertico.rsw. You'll find links to all of my other content across platforms on my Instagram as well. And I'll toss it back to Lynn for a Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lewis. I love how communication is something we experience every single day, and yet we don't take a lot of time to reflect and think about, how we're relaying what we're trying to say and maybe be a little more thoughtful about it. So thank you for walking us through that and providing some really good practical tips to move forward with us. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. It's great to have you and learn alongside you in tonight's session. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening.